Well, good evening, and good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains episode 994. That close to 1,000. Goodness gracious. This is for the 3rd of February, 2025. WeatherBrains, 19 years old as of last week. This is the world's oldest weather podcast. We're not the best, but hey, we're the longest running. And for those that are new here, this is the pre-show. This is the magical part of the program where we typically do three things. We share boring personal stories, we share humorous anecdotes, and from time to time, we say very outrageous things. And you don't get this in the audio produced podcast version that starts at the top of the hour. And if you're looking for the beginning of the show, move the slider over about 7 minutes, 6 or 7 minutes. But if you do that, you might miss something good. The pre-show. Yeah, we turned 19 last week. And real quick, I'll roll. I love to do this. This is January 31st. January 31st of 2006.
I personally think we have way too many warnings. Severe thunderstorm warnings are a dime a dozen, and it's getting to be that way with tornado warning.
Welcome to WeatherBrains, the podcast about weather by weather fans. I'm David Black with the Weather Company from Birmingham, Alabama, welcoming you to our first program. With me tonight, James Spann, the chief meteorologist of ABC 3340 Television in Birmingham, Alabama. Hello, James.
Hey, David, how you doing?
Man, oh man. Brings back memories of long ago and far away. That was show number 1. David Black. It was very well produced. It was a 30-minute show back then, and very well produced. David Black was the host, and he packaged it together, and nobody even knew what a podcast was. But by golly, we're early adopters here. Early adopters get the worm. So 19 years, Bill Murray. You were on that show, weren't you?
I was, and I'm so excited, James. Every show we get together, I'm just more and more excited about it. Like
No,
the show tonight.
And really and truly, from day one, I think the deal is when you work long hours, everybody needs just some little part of the day just to be yourself and to be creative and to talk about what's on your mind. And that's all this was. It was just a little window for us to have a little fun. And I honestly didn't care if anybody listened. That trust me, that was not the object of the game. But it's kind of morphed into this thing where it's kind of you heard what Bill Curtis says. I mean, here, let me play the Bill Curtis intro here. Hang on here. Yeah, this is Bill Curtis.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
I think he meant that too, James.
I do too.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, I really think he did.
And it's nice when you get an email like this week that says, you're my favorite podcast. That means a whole lot.
Yeah.
Well, I told my sister to quit sending those in. And I don't have a sister. I don't have any siblings, so it wasn't anybody in my family.
Tell her the check is on the way, James.
Yeah. But goodness, I'm looking at all these old clips in here. I guess we could bring a few back for show 1,000, but man, oh man, goodness.
Oh yeah, I have a gazillion from like show 200, because that was like a big deal. Show 200 was like a giant deal, So, but show 1,000 is going to be a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. I'm looking forward to it. Starting to come together now.
Yay!
Okay.
Hopefully have some breaking news on it, and sometime in this week ahead.
But this, out of all the clips, this is my favorite. And you got to know J.B. Elliott, who was, of course, part of our original cast until his death. But this is one of my favorites.
JB, did you see this one today? Indian girls plow fields naked in attempt to bring rain.
No.
No? Now, you've never done this, have you, during a drought?
Yes.
You have plowed fields naked.
16, and I was just so hot.
That was the 1952 heat wave.
I was just so hot. I was just so hot.
Lord.
Oh my goodness.
Ah, that
and
probably
see,
brought on the
our listen-
1952 heat wave.
our listeners send this stuff in. They do all this production. I mean, that's the greatest. The greatest part of this thing is they send in the best material. I mean, but
That's for
that was
sure.
a good one. All right, enough of foolishness.
Hi, Angela. It's so nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you all.
We can hear you. You hear
I
us okay?
we apologize for our foolishness.
We do
Well,
apologize.
no, foolishness is fine.
Yeah.
I've
What's that you got on the other hand right there, Angela? What do you have in your left hand?
Oh, this one? Yeah, this
both-
was the
yeah.
original.
The original. Okay.
I've had two publications of this. I had my first publisher just quit about 3 years into it. And so I found another publisher about 2 years later. And it's
Cool.
Yeah. I really like that cover.
Yeah, I do
Voice
too,
for life.
Jen. I was thinking the same
Yeah,
thing.
that's really great.
The problem was it is copyrighted in Library of Congress, and the whole thing is Death Rise the Sky, the story of the 1925 tri-state tornado, which is there at the bottom. My new publisher didn't want to include that. He thought that was too long. I'm like, no, okay, it's long, but we need to tell people it's about the 1925 tri-state tornado.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's got it. It's good. Everybody in the area knows what it is.
So, all right, we'll start here. And Angela, just so you'll know, we are live now on YouTube, and we'll hit local television at the top of the hour in about 30 seconds. And once we do that, we can start.
And you can come to Jen last, James, so
and-
she can introduce her. So
Mm-hmm.
you can
Okay,
just-
and
chat
everybody
with
wants
me.
us to talk about this Oklahoma storm chase law thing. Everybody wants us to talk about that, and that's why I'm glad Rick Smith just joined us, because he's the guy that can talk about that. Or just James Adelot's on here. Either one of you guys. And here comes Kim. Now the whole
Well, the
Oklahoma
contingent
is here.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
Perfect.
So that way, and welcome to our television viewers. We're at the top of the hour, but everybody wants us to talk about this Oklahoma storm chase legal thing, and we will do that. But first off, let's get this thing started here. We will record track 1, and we will record track 2. And here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
In the words of Bill Curtis, you heard it. Hey, this is WeatherBrains, episode number 994, the weekly show for weather geeks, dweebs, nerds, dorks, and weenies. The oldest, longest running weather podcast in the universe, 19 years old, is 1 week ago. I feel good about this show. Rick Smith, do you feel good about this show?
I absolutely do. I mean, this is, how could you not feel good? It was like 84 degrees here today. Yeah, people have switched over to spring, and they're going to be rudely in for a rude awakening in a little while when winter comes back. So, but it was a beautiful day here today. Couldn't beat it.
And for those that are listening and not watching, Rick is in a tank top and flip-flops. So there you go. That's a sign of the 84-degree warmth.
Yes.
Kim, what are you wearing with your mid-80s today? What you got going there?
What show is this?
Yeah.
I opted for jeans and a sleeveless sweater. So yeah, cheers to our early spring. I took all of the vitamin D production that I could get today. It was wonderful to have some sunshine, and I think there are a lot of us who could use a little bit of vitamin D right about now.
Yes, I will agree with that. And let's go to James. James, what's your attire on your warm day there?
I am in my work uniform today, so it's always cold in the studio, so it could be 105 outside, 52 inside. So yeah, record high in Tulsa today. We beat the old record by 4. So.
How warm was it? What was the official high there?
83.
Woo! Goodness gracious.
Sorry, Jan.
So that's got to mean down in Troy's country, it's what, 103?
Not quite 103, but it did get up to 84, both at Camp Mabry, which is the Austin City ASOS site, and also out at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. All-time records, and again, James, by 4 degrees here as well, I think, at both locations. One of them going back at Camp Mabry, our city site, going back to 1911.
What's interesting to me is watching the camera at Gulf Shores, Alabama today. 2 weeks ago tonight, they were under a winter storm warning. And the next day, they would have 6 inches of snow on the ground. And now today, oddly enough, they're the cool spot. They are the cool spot in the great state of Alabama. Everybody else in the 70s, Gulf Shores had a high of 67. Why would that be?
Southerly wind off the Gulf.
Ocean temperatures. The water temp is
58.
57. Yeah, 57, the one I saw, the buoy down at Gulf Shores. So the cool water coming in off the Gulf, whatever we call it these days, it's kept temperatures low on the immediate coast. But Bill Murray, what we do up here? 75?
76,
today?
I think, was the high at
76.
Birmingham. And I don't know how.
Okay.
I did a post yesterday, but I don't remember what I wrote exactly for Birmingham because I did all the 5 Central Alabama sites about what the record was for today. And I noticed that Muscle Shoals did set a record high today, thanks to Jack Rudden from our team who posted about it. But I think our high at Birmingham today was relatively high. It was like the record high was like 80 degrees. So I think we've got a much better chance of breaking it. Our record high today was 77, so we were just a degree short. I think we got a better shot, maybe. No, that's not true. I didn't even track today, so disregard everything I've said. Tomorrow's record high at Birmingham is 77.
Never mind. Yeah.
And
forget
Wednesday's record high is 76. So I think we got a shot to break Wednesday here in Birmingham for sure. So, but just disregard everything else I said, James.
Okay, just scratch it from the records. And again, a lot of people are asking us to comment on the storm chasing regulations in Oklahoma, and so we have our 3 Oklahoma correspondents here, and we will get into that later. But Jen, let me turn it over to you, and you will bring in our guest this week.
Absolutely. Yes. From the mild Ohio at 58 today. I was loving it. So I was fiddling outside, taking a walk today. It was awesome. But I'm excited about tonight's show. It's a very important show. As we look back to Wednesday, March 18th, 1925, it was a tornado event that occurred that few people will ever experience in their lifetime. 219-mile path across the states of Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana, 13 counties and over 19 communities affected, 15,000 homes destroyed, over 2,000 people injured, many severely, and tragically 695 people lost their lives that day. Our guest tonight is Angela Mason, author of Death Rides the Sky, the story of the 1925 tri-state tornado. It is one of now 5 books to emerge about this deadly event, but this book is different than the others. It tells the story through the eyes of those who experienced it, the survivors, many of whom were children when the tornado swept down from the skies and left its irreversible mark on their lives. Angela is originally from Wayne County, Illinois, 1 county north of the tri-state tornado's path. She spent most of her life in music and vocal performance. She always been intrigued by this tri-state tornado and embarked upon a journey on learning more about this event through the eyes of the survivors. We welcome Angela to WeatherBrains.
Thank you. I am so honored to be here among you all. This is great, especially James. I have been a fan forever. I lived in Alabama for 6 years, but it was on the coast. So I know
Well, you're way too kind, and it is an honor for you to be on the show. So thank you for the time.
Yeah, we're excited to have you on here. And so we're just going to throw you right into it as we do with everybody. We want to talk about you as a little kid and just talk about your life growing up in Wayne County. And was there ever any weather interest in your life when you were little?
Yes, actually there was. That was kind of a weird thing because we were very, very poor. And we lived in a kind of a ramshackle house. And every time the wind blew, our linoleum in the kitchen floor would lift up. And that was something that just scared me. And as a young child, 3-4 years old, I was absolutely fascinated by the Wizard of Oz. And this is how my parents found out I could sing, because it would show on TV every year. And then I would sit down and sing Over the Rainbow, ultimately. And it was kind of a musical savant thing. I just, at a very young age, learned how to do that. So that was what I was going to pursue in my life. But I went to college on a voice scholarship. I got interested in literature at an early age. And so I minored in the literature field, thinking I was going to go into college to teach literature. And instead, I got interested in writing. So to support my writing habit, I would sing. To support my singing habit, I would be a DJ on a local radio station. And I was down in Lower Alabama for a number of years with WKRG. So I've been through all kinds of weather here in Southern Illinois. We have terrible winter storms. We just went through one. And of course, we have tornadoes, and I went through plenty of those when I was a child. And so this thing with this tornado, this particular tornado, didn't really strike me until I was 19 years old, and my grandpa and I were talking about it. And he actually had debris in their fields from the tornado 2 counties to the south. So it was just so massive to me. I was 19 years old and I was like, why have I never heard of this? And as it turned out, why I hadn't heard of it really was because folks didn't talk about it. They were so traumatized. And every year there'd be a newspaper account, around the anniversary. Well, that's how this book got written. I was working for a newspaper and I was a salesperson, but I also wrote. So I would come up with something to write about, and then I'd sell it. And that made my boss money, and he was happy. He just let me do whatever I wanted to do. So I went to do a story on the 74th anniversary in 1999 of the tri-state tornado. And it was massive. I couldn't believe the number of people who were so interested in this. When I went to do the story, I was interviewing people who were really aged. There was one lady that was 90, and that was in 1999. So she was older when it happened, and she remembered it. And as I went through the countryside, I began to realize these people are dying, and their stories are dying with them. And if we want to know what really happened in the storm's path, we need to talk to the people who were there. So I set out that year, and it was 2 years worth of research and writing to get that book.
Yeah, we're going to dive into all that. Bill, did you want to explore a little bit more about
this
Alabama?
is just my night to be foolish tonight. So I have to tell a little secret on myself because, like James Spann always does, hit the post, and always wanted to be a DJ. But Angela, the station that I always was G100. I thought G100 in Mobile was the coolest radio station on the earth. So what years were you there?
Yeah, I was there from almost all of 1984 and almost all of 1985. I was Yes.
That's when I loved that radio station. So it was probably because of you. But whenever I'm like playing Hit the Post like Span does, when I'm in the car and people are looking at me on the interstate like this guy's insane, I'm like, you're listening
That's
to
Leonard
G100
Skinner on G100. G100, Leonard Skinner.
WKRG Mobile. Let's go to Bill Murray in the Weather Center for the latest on Hurricane Camille.
I was the animal Andy McGuire. That was my area.
Now say that again. You were the animal Andy McGuire?
Animal Andy McGuire.
Okay.
And I was midnight to 6 every night and 6 to midnight on Saturdays.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So did you, I guess weather was important in Mobile because of hurricanes and things like that. So, because they'd been through Hurricane Frederick in 1979 and, had a close call and, with what was the hurricane in 1985, James Spann, that came back across the Gulf, Elena?
Yeah, Elena and Juan. Juan was a really bad one that year. It canceled all of our Halloween activities, which is a big deal in Mobile.
Yeah, a little bit of one. But anyway, that's my little guilty pleasure is that when I am a radio DJ, I am at WKRG G100. I thought that was cool that you were there. So how did you get a job in radio and what made that happen?
I was pursuing my singing career, and I was at Mobile Theater Guild auditioning for Jesus Christ Superstar. And Dick Hilton was one of the DJs there. He's very prominent, very well known. And he was going to play the part of Pilot, I think. And he and I were just sitting in the audience chatting. And he said, well, you have a good speaking voice. Have you ever done radio? And I'm like, yeah, I've done radio. He said, why don't you come and cut me a demo tape and we'll see if we can get you in. And I was in that weekend.
Angela, this is Troy. Somebody that started out in radio as well back in about this same time period. People have to remember as well, Angela, when you said you worked midnight to 6 a.m. and then 6 p.m. to midnight, you were there in those time periods. This is before all the voice tracking of nowadays, when there's not a live person in a station for about 18 hours of the day.
Yes.
So I think that's really important to point out, and why we go back and we look and see why radio is so important. And I still believe it is. I still believe it is, but we've got to look at way we've treated it. And, I still can't believe we're pulling AM radios out of vehicles. Anyway, I have tremendous amount of respect for you, because it's a whole lot different from today as it was back in those days.
What I remember, this is how old I am. In Mobile, the big legendary top 40 AM radio station was WABB with Gary Mitchell. And that was the legendary station during the great hurricanes of the 70s, Eloise and Frederick. I was there for both, and I would listen, and it was the WBSR in Pensacola, WABB in Mobile. They converted from these rock and roll radio stations that played Leonard Skinner and Led Zeppelin, and they converted to this all-weather, all-the-time critical lifeline role. And it was just fascinating, and they did an amazing job back in the 70s and in the 80s as well. So I agree. Listen, radio's still a big deal, and it can save a lot of lives. So
absolutely,
that's our editorial for the evening. Thank you, Jen. I'm sorry.
That's okay. And as the lonely radio girl on this panel, I appreciate all of your support. So thank you. So Angela, I want to get back to your talking to your grandpa, and I was reading that in the first part of the new version of your book, and they were not, impacted by the path, but you said that they had the debris, right? That they could see all that. But then there was a lot more to it. I mean, it was even probably hard for them to talk about, and they weren't even in it. So just kind of tell us, what it was like having that conversation with him, and what did he share? Because wasn't there members of your family or some friends who actually went down there to check on folks who weren't that far away?
My great grandpa.
Yeah.
My great grandpa was the one who actually went down to Enfield. But see, I didn't learn this until later. I think that information came from my uncle. So I kind of insert that when I go do presentations, because the book's done and I'm not going to have a reprint of it, But my grandpa Mason was the one who told me about it. We were having severe weather in the summer of '81. And he was sitting there saying, this kind of reminds me of 1925. And I said, oh, yeah, what happened then? He was 14 years old when it happened. He said, oh, it was a big storm. And I said, oh, really? How big? And he said, killed about 700 people. And my heart just dropped in my chest. I said, you're kidding me. When, where, how? Because I always was interested in weather, but also in disasters. I was fascinated by earthquakes and typhoons and things like that. So I had him sit there and tell me all he could about it. And then later I found out that my great grandpa Bora, he had a very strong mule team in a big wagon. He was a rum runner, and that's why he had all that material, but he had all that back then. And he had phone also. So they called him from down south and White County, and they had him come over because they needed his help to pull buildings out of the street, buildings that had fallen over. So they were putting them up on skids and then pulling them over with the mule team and putting them back on their foundation. And some of those houses are still there today.
Go ahead, James A.
Yeah, Angela, thanks so much for being on. This is James in Tulsa. This is probably a dumb question, but how did people in nearby towns get word to have this emergent response of first aid? Because it's 1925. How did that work?
Well, there were very, very few telephone lines. My great grandpa only had one because they were kind of wealthy. So he was able to be notified, but also there were a lot of telegraph going out, and they did send that out. There were so many lines down that it literally was peripheral to the path. The path went anywhere from yards wide to miles wide. The widest part of the path was in Hamilton County at 1.5 miles. So you have to think about what all was affected and how far out the telegraph lines were down, the telephone lines were down. There just wasn't a lot of warning. One of the most harrowing stories that was told to me was in the village of DeSoto, and the guy Sam, I can't think this guy's name right now, but he was working at the rail yard, and he got word at the rail yard that something very bad had happened over in Borum, and they couldn't finish getting it through because of all the debris and mess, but they got word somehow to where Sam was working in the rail yard in DeSoto. And so Sam went out running up and down the streets of DeSoto telling people that this was coming. This big dark cloud that was out of the southwest was coming. So literally word of mouth. And then as regards the aftermath, there were just people out and about. There were a lot of looky-loos. And so some of the more enterprising people in the towns set up buckets. And if the looky-loos wanted to look, they needed to drop some coins in the buckets because they were going to be going to the people who were surviving.
That's interesting. Wow. So you get this story from your grandpa. You're just doing your life, radio, singing, whatever, trying to get your way through. And then you're like, you found yourself working at a local newspaper, and you started to explore this for one of the anniversaries. How did you go from writing that newspaper article to deciding, you know what, I'm going to write a book on this?
Sighting of Doppler radar, of all things. There was big hearings being held over in Evansville, Indiana, to sight a Doppler radar in the Owensville area. Now, Owensville had been struck by this tornado, Owensville, Indiana. And my boss wanted me to go to this because it would impact us in the southern Illinois area. So I went to the hearings to take photos and kind of cover it, and do a report on it when I got back. Well, I happened to have with me the newspaper that I'd done the anniversary story on. And it's got a great big dark tornado on the front page of it. And I was listening to all these people talk about their concerns, and they needed Doppler and this whole thing. And finally, after about an hour of this, I stopped reporting and I pulled out that paper and I put myself on the list, and I knew I had 3 minutes. I went up to the microphone and I said, look, and I held this paper up with this video, and it said "Death Rides the Sky" because that's what I had called the article. And I said, this is the most devastating tornado to ever impact anywhere, and it happened right in our backyard. Why would you not sight a radar right there in Owensville? I think this is crazy, and I don't know that they ever did sight it. I think they may have put it closer to Evansville, but after I was done making my presentation, I was just swarmed by people. There were meteorologists from all over the country. One gentleman from Florida who gave me his card, and he said, if you're doing any more research on this thing, give me a call. I can help you out. I'm like, well, I've already written this story. And he said, well, you probably need to write a book about it. Peter Feltner's book was the only one that was out at the time. He said, you've already started it in this paper. Go ahead and write a book about it. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good idea. So I picked up my kids and went to Missouri. And my husband, his name is Jack, he was the editor at the paper at the time. We weren't married. We weren't even seeing each other. And I talked to him about it. And I said, I've written stories before. I've been published all over the place. And I said, I've never written a whole book. How do I do this? He says, I've got it. He said, you start at the beginning. And when you're at the end, you're done. And I said, well, that kind of makes sense because the tornado dropped out of the sky. outside of Ellington, and it lifted up off the ground outside of Petersburg, Indiana. That's a beginning and an end. Let's do it. And so there I went to Ellington, Missouri, and I spent a lot of time there, all the way through Missouri, all the way through Illinois, and all the way through Indiana, and even beyond.
Angela, we're like kindred spirits. I mean, I'm loving talking to you because this is what we do at Tornado Talk. And that's how you reached out to me, is through Tornado Talk. You've been, I know, a follower of us on Facebook for a while, and we appreciate your support on doing that. But what you're doing, and I'm so interested in diving into more about your whole process of getting these stories, is what we've been embarking on really for the past 2 years, of going out and doing the interviews and getting to libraries and history centers and getting those stories, because they're going to be lost if we don't. We have to find them. And as we are, moving into our virtual tornado memorial, I've tasked my little team and myself to find the names of the 22,000 people that we've estimated have been killed by tornadoes across the centuries. I want to know their names. And so your passion to go down the path from beginning to end and try to interview folks just absolutely fascinates me. And I wish I had had time to read more of your book before you came on the show, but I promise you I will, because I can't wait just to go snuggle up and go read, because I really am bonding with you right now on your journey. But so I just want to kind of take you through, and then, panelists, stop her at any point and just ask questions. But I wanted to start with, you started from the beginning of the path to the end. How many interviews did you end up doing?
I interviewed 54 people, all of them survivors. And then I really have lost track of the peripheral interviews that I did, which were with their family members, their younger family members. Because usually I would have to find a younger family member first and say, okay, Pops has, he lives in this cabin out here in the hills of Missouri. Let's go out there and see him. That kind of thing. So I kind of lost count of how many of the peripheral people, but 54 survivors, 48 allowed me to run their names and tell their stories. The other ones, again, they were so traumatized. The trauma was so deep in them. They would talk to me, and then they'd burst into tears. And then they'd calm themselves, and then they'd tell me a little bit more. And then they'd finally say, look, if you are really writing a book about this, don't use my name. This is just too much for me. And I wonder if maybe their family members hadn't seen what I saw with them breaking into tears. And maybe they couldn't bear the thought of that going on. But that was how many? 48, 4 dozen people I was able to find between 1999 and 2001 to interview for their stories. And it was, I'm sure there are news people here, history can be tweaked. And that's sad. And I don't like history being tweaked. I like stats, and I like solid, hard information and evidence. And I feel like each of these people, I could write an entire book about each one of them. They just had so much. They just poured it out. They went through so much, and they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, and then kept going afterwards. And that, to me, was the most amazing thing. I mean, it was one person after another, after another, after another. That's how they got through it.
Yeah, Angela, I found that after the 1932 tornado, because I had the privilege, like you have had, of interviewing a dozen or so survivors. And mine wanted to tell their stories. It may be because they were younger at the time. This would have been in 2008 or so. And they welcomed me into their homes, and they cooked me breakfast, and they listened. They talked into the recorder, and those recordings are spectacular. But I was struck by, and you were 7 years earlier, 1925. The Depression was raging in Alabama in 1932, and I fully expected there to be stories of hardship. And most of these tornadoes in Alabama, of course, struck in rural areas. A lot of the tri-state tornado struck major, towns, 10,000, 15,000 people. Princeton, Murfreesboro, bigger towns that had factories and things like that. And I've loved reading your book. I read most of it, over the weekend. But the thing that really stood with me, besides what you said, and I have a story from that. One lady who was a little girl said that their house was destroyed, and the next morning they got up and she went to school.
Yes.
In Alabama, they close the schools if there's drop of a hat now, whatever happens, we close the schools. But she walked to school and she walked back. And so she walked by the church where they were collecting, items for relief. And the lady got her and said, "Hey, did the tornado affect you?" And she said, "Yeah, it tore our house up." And she said, "Well, come over here. You don't have any shoes. Come get some shoes." The little girl was barefooted, and she said she walked over and she found the cutest little pair of black patent leather shoes that somebody had donated. And she grabbed them and they fit. And the lady said, they're yours. Take them with you." And she walked home and she was on top of a cloud. And she walked up there where people were already rebuilding her house. The neighbors had come and they were working with her father and her uncles, and they were building the house back. And her dad said, "Where'd you get those shoes?" And she said, "Oh, they're down at the church. They gave me these shoes." And he said, "You march back and take them those shoes back, because we do not take charity." And I thought, wow, what a different world. Because, they didn't wait for the Red Cross or anybody to show up. And I want you to talk about relief in a minute, because I know that you touch on that in the book at the end. But, they didn't wait. Like you said, they pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, and they went for it. But I thought I would hear these tales of hardship, and there were some. James, you remember the gentleman that we had on? He wrote a book. We went down to Chilton County and interviewed him. Do you remember that with JB?
Yes, he was in the 1932 tornado. His name was Jack Latham.
Yeah, that's right.
And
he wrote a little book called "My God, It's a
he
Cyclone," because that's what his
he
dad
was
saw.
orphaned. Right.
He
Right.
threw open the door. They were playing the organ in the house, after dinner, and his dad heard a noise. And they opened the door, and tornado filled his field of view. And his last words were, "My God, it's a cyclone." He and his brother found themselves buried in a field. That's when they came to, and it was a fascinating story about Mr. Latham. And it was an honor to go and talk to him, James, especially with JB. Going down there and learning about him. And his father had come on hard times, Mr. Latham's father, and tells the story in the book that his father walked, 4 or 5 miles. They had a car, but they didn't have any gas, and they couldn't run it. So he walked to the general store in Plantersville or somewhere down there in Chilton County. And he said, "I'm praying to God to take my family because I can't feed them." And he told the proprietor that. And so that that week later, this tornado comes, and he told that story, about that. But the thing that surprised me was that most people in rural Alabama didn't view it as a depression era. They had food, they had livestock, they had trees, orchards, and they had gardens, and they kind of thought they were living in the lap of luxury. The hard times were in the cities like Birmingham, and probably the same, maybe, not in 1925, because obviously that was a kind of an economic boom time, for the United States. But those two things struck me from that tornado. Rural areas were affected, and people sort of just pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and made it happen. And I admire that today. And I think we've lost a lot of that along the way. We can't take care of ourselves, and I hate that. So that sort of preparation takes moxie, and it takes planning, and it gives us an opportunity today to make sure that we're planning, and that we're preaching the gospel of preparation, and being ready for these things, because when they drop into your neighborhood, it's a bad day, whether they're an EF0 or an EF5 or whatever they are. So, but anyway, I'm glad you collected all of this, because I'm grateful for that time that I had with those little folks, and they're probably being lost at a rapid clip now.
Yeah, the folks that I spoke with were all like that. They were, many of them, most of them were in their 80s in 1999, 2000, 2001. Some, the oldest that I spoke with, Jeanette, was 95. She was in DeSoto, so she would have been 20 when it happened, but she could recall it just like it happened yesterday. I interviewed her in a nursing home. And yeah, and there were a couple of other ones that were, Cecil Spain was in his 90s when I interviewed him. And he was the one who told about the house in the road that they actually had to drive through. The house was just a frame of a house basically in the road. He and his doctor roommate, because they were being called to West Frankfort to doctor the people who were injured in the storm. And they actually drove through a house. And I said, "Oh, Cecil, you watched Twister too much." And he said, "No, this really happened. It really happened like that." And he wondered aloud. He said, did they know when they did Twister? Did they put that together?" But it was just unbelievable things. The things that they told me, and I had to put them in a perspective. I had to tell them in a believable way, because I was sitting there talking to these people, and sometimes, very often, my children were there, and they were all under the age of 12. My youngest was 3 when this was going on. And so sometimes they were in the way, and sometimes they'd come up and they'd talk and they'd say, "You gotta be kidding me. That, somebody's whatever was wrapped around a light pole, something that shouldn't be wrapped around a light pole." And the person I was interviewing would say, "Yeah, it really happened that way, honey. It's like that."
Angela, Troy here. I have a question for you, and I've always wondered, and this goes to the rest of the panel as well. One of the things that I've always heard about that tornado is it occurred in a time of relative drought in that area of the country, and they said that at times when it was its largest, that when people saw it, they weren't so much concerned. They thought it was a dust storm rather than just a huge cloud of dust. They didn't the tornado, and I'm wondering whether in your research or even any of the other panelists, if you've ever heard that before. That's just one thing that I'd heard, and I was wondering if you happened to run across that, Angela.
Absolutely. In Gorham, Illinois, in Jackson County, right there on the Mississippi River, they didn't know what they were looking at. They knew that it was dark and it was clouds, and they were in the middle of a very dry time. You can tell that later when you read the part about Griffin. The Wabash River was very, very low. And there are spots in the Wabash River you can actually walk across when it's really low because of all the sandbars. So people, even on the rivers, were used to seeing, you go out and you plow up your fields. And if you have a big dust storm and it is dry, that will happen. Absolutely. But they thought in Gorham what they were looking at could have been dust. And it was just these rolling clouds coming in. And I've had the Weatherman chapter, the gentleman who helped me with that, said that what was happening was the vortex of tornado was actually picking up the water and atomizing it. Like in an atomizer we ladies use, to spray, only it was inside this gigantic vortex that had vortices within it. And it was just churning up the water, and they really couldn't tell what it was. They couldn't tell if it was clouds, water, or dust.
There's a haunting eyewitness account in your book, Angela, and I don't remember which person tells it or which town. You might immediately, but they talked about the thunder, and the thunder is different. It was different here on April 27th, 2011. It was totally different to anything I've heard. And the description in the book fits it perfectly. It's not one thunderclap or even a series of thunderclaps. It's a never-ending rumble. And I know James A's heard it. I know Troy's heard it. I bet Rick Smith's heard it. It's different when you hear that one. And one of your eyewitness accounts is a school child that remembered that, going out on the playground and hearing it.
I believe that was probably in DeSoto. And if that's the case, I think 2 chapters noted how odd the thunder was. Annapolis in Missouri, and the DeSoto in Illinois. It was described, and I really didn't pick up on this until after it was basically when the book was all done, but a lot of people did describe it as this low, guttural, nonstop rumble, 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 with occasional big bursts. But it's like it never stopped as it approached. And yeah, that's weird.
And I haven't done this, but I bet Chuck Doswell and some other folks that you refer to in the book have. The analysis of the temperatures and dew points in the environment of the tornado, and Troy may know this, or somebody else on the show may know. What were we talking about that day? Were they in the 70s and, over dew points in the 60s, or, were they ridiculously higher than that? Troy, do you know? And Angela, have you researched that? I looked through the book trying to find those numbers, and so now I'm on a crusade to find that out. Because just a storm of this magnitude and duration had to be drawing on incredible energy, and I can't wait to go back and stand on the shoulders of some of the folks. Kim Cloco McLean is getting excited over there. I know she's going to bring something really incredible to this conversation, because we can stand on the shoulders of some folks that have done some research here. Kim, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just sitting here wishing that, Chuck was still with us. He would absolutely do this. And I was just thinking, he had done the retrospective of the 25 event, the tri-state, to determine if it was a conterminous path. He'd worked on that with folks like Bob Johns. All these people that he'd done that with are all gone now. Just crazy to think. But to the point about what the environment could have been like, it was an early season tornado outbreak. And I have to imagine what's likely is it was probably a lot like the Mid-South tornado outbreak in a very similar area, just displaced a bit, of December 10th, 2021. And, we can get these very, very unusual, just combination of factors that when you get the right shear profile, especially in the cool season, it doesn't take a whole lot. If you get just a little bit of instability, and especially if you get moderate instability in that kind of high shear environment, you can get stuff that goes for forever. So I'm not sure offhand what the environment was, but I imagine it was something probably like that.
Our own staff researcher, Rick Smith, has already turned up something that Jen had found earlier. Rick, did you want to comment any? Maybe as a cursory review of that document?
About 2 seconds of a review. I just wanted to get the link in there. Jen, I think, spoiler alert, is probably going to talk about this link a little bit later on. But yeah, interestingly enough, Doswell, one of the authors of this paper, Meteorological Analysis of the Tri-State Tornado Event, March 1925. So I think some of the answers to some of those questions may be in there.
Oh, awesome. I can't wait to find that out. And Kim referred to the Mayfield tornado outbreak, because we were watching this thing, happen in real time. Angela, were you watching that same tornado in December of 2021? And were you thinking the same thing, that, hey, this could be another one?
Yes, that's exactly what I thought. And that one really, I don't know. I didn't get to go down there and see the devastation, but there were a lot of people in our area here in Southern Illinois that it piqued their interest after the Mayfield tornado in the book. And I had this resurgence at the end of the COVID lockdowns and everything, all these people wanting to learn more about this now. I really wish I could promote to Bob Johns and Chuck Doswell and all those, that they went right behind me, that team. I wish I had known. See, I'm a Limey. I have Lyme disease. And I contracted that in 1999 while I was actually in the process of researching this. And it laid me low long about 2002. That's why we couldn't publish the book until much later. But those folks were right behind me, and I wish I had known they were, because I would have loved to have talked to them and got more weather specifications. They gifted me with the book, but I'm not a weather person. I am interested in weather, but I can't spout you the statistics and things like you wonderful other people can. So, I just do the human interest side of it, and then juxtapose that with the weather. So those folks on that team, my hat's off to them. That was just amazing work that they did. They were very detailed. They went to places that I couldn't even access, private land and that kind of thing. They went out there to try and just get the actual coordinates and see if there was anything left. Sometimes there are twisted trees. Sometimes there are things that actually are left from them. They were actually right there in places that I couldn't even get to.
Bill, I've got a question for you, and this one maybe Rick can answer as well, and maybe Kim. But having been a good friend of Bob Johns, I miss Bob every day. I know that he spent a lot of time as he continued to research that, trying to see if that path extended back further southwest, to see if it could be lengthened any or something back into south central or more into southeastern areas of Missouri. Bill, that's true, right? I mean,
and Troy, I think that Angela can comment on that, because I think she touched on it in her book.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, my new publisher let me add some material to the book. After I spoke with Chuck Doswell and some of those folks, they believe that the tornado actually may have dropped not outside of Ellington, but outside of, I believe it's a town called, or was a town called Gang, Missouri, in Shannon County, which would have added 15 more miles to the track. So instead of 219, then we'd have 234. They based that reasoning on a report to I think it was the Red Cross, that a farmer had lost his barn and he was in bad shape without any hay for his animals, and he needed some assistance. I don't know if they got him hay or if they got him monetary assistance. I don't know, but there was a request for assistance because the tornado had dropped on his farm.
And that's all outlined in this paper, Troy. The paper here, and that's my pick of the week, it's really, really good. And it goes through, their whole plan of how they went on this trip to do a reanalysis of the path. And essentially, officially accepted path is 219. After plotting all their damage points, they had a potential path of 235 miles. There were 32 gaps in there, though, of about a mile. And so then they had to go through and try to resolve, okay, was this because we didn't have any information, or did it lift, or what have you? And so in the end, I'll read this part here from it. Even though we are unable to say conclusively if there are real gaps along the center part of the 1925 tri-state damage path, two were apparent near both ends. So if you omit those, the beginning and the end, the tri-state tornado started either in far western Reynolds County or extreme southeastern Shannon County, Missouri, and then ended in western Pike County, Indiana, having a possible path length of 219 miles. So they still are suggesting that it could have been 219. And despite this length estimate being the same as originally reported, the revised path differs from that original version, notably at the beginning and the end. They had adjusted it. So they take you through all of that, where they got the information, who they talked to. It is really an amazing paper.
Thank you, Jen. I'll look that up. Yeah.
You bet. So, Angela, I'm trying to figure out where we want to go next with this, because I've got so many more questions, and just kind of thinking through some of the people that you talked to. I am curious, what are some of the examples of how people describe the damage, whether it's to their home or to their town or to a business? I just wanted to just get some understanding of how did they describe it?
Well, one after another said that they thought it was the end of the world. They had been, raised in a church, most of them. And they believed that God was going to come back, that Jesus was going to come back, whatever their religious belief was, and take out all the bad people and leave all the good people. And they also thought that there would be a little bit of destruction in there. So these 5, 6, 7-year-old children would walk out of a destroyed building and they didn't recognize where they were. And so they literally thought, oh, Jesus has come back and I'm still alive, so that's good. You know, but yeah, they thought it was just over. There were gentlemen who came up out of the mine in Annapolis. They had lead mines there in Annapolis, Missouri. And when they emerged up out of the mine, they couldn't believe what they saw. They thought that something really, really bad, something supernatural perhaps, had come through and just flattened everything they knew. They didn't believe that their families were still alive. They all went running back into town to find the same kind of damage there. But there were quite a few survivors. But yeah.
Angela, thanks so much for being on. This is fascinating. I was just curious for those who, I don't know, who knew it was a tornado, was there any realization? And I'm just curious what kind of stories you may have heard about the protective actions people may have taken. You know, did they know enough to take shelter? Where did they take shelter? Did they open door? You know, I'm just curious about what kind of stories you may have heard about the little time that they had to react, what they did with that.
Well, one of the things that I noted was that the farmers in large area farmland, the farmers were very weather wise. They could tell that there was something not right about that day as soon as they got up. And first of all, it was too warm and the air was so close. And so when they started seeing clouds brewing in the west, southwest, they figured that, you know, a big storm was coming up. Well, they didn't know it was going to be what it was. And it happened so fast. The forward moving speed of this thing as it crossed each of the rivers, the Mississippi and the Wabash, in the 70s, was in the 70 mile per hour range. That's fast. And it's like you look out the window and you see a cloud and then bam, there's the tornado, which is what I always said when I lived in Alabama. I'll take a hurricane over a tornado any day because you've got plenty of warning. You can get out of harm's way. But tornadoes, they'll drop on your head and knock your chimney down. And so that was what was happening. But there were some that were able to see it in Gorham, as an example. They were able to take shelter. A lot of people took shelter at the rail house. They had a lot of, they worked on cars, the rail cars there, repair and maintenance. And same thing in Murfreesboro too. They had a roundhouse in Murfreesboro. So the people who were able to see it coming were able to take shelter. In the schools, some of the people, like a school janitor in Gorham, saw it coming and started ringing the bell at the school and telling the children to come down from the upper floors. And they didn't make it because the stairs collapsed. And the belfry was right above the stairwell. It came down on the collapsed stairs. In, let me see, DeSoto. I keep going back to DeSoto because that was the hardest chapter to write. It was children. There were 38 deaths there, and mostly children. And there was a teacher in their newly constructed school building who told all the boys, she said, oh, it looks like a cyclone's coming. So she said, well, I want the boys to go over and hold the window shut, and all you little girls get up here by the blackboard with me. And they did. And the little boys were sucked out the window. They were being chivalrous, you know. So they just didn't have a lot of time to take shelter. There was a gentleman in Phillipstown who was actually in a shelter. He was sprouting potatoes, and so he was in the root cellar, and he heard the noise of this approaching thing, and he come up out of the root cellar, and he didn't duck his head, and it got him right there. Some kind of debris took his head off. So there were people who just it was so fast. They just didn't have time.
Well, Angela, one thing that I think is interesting is about you talk about the day. The day they sort of when they entered that day, there just was something not right. And I guess as a meteorologist, we can look at that and go, well, that's not the case. But I can still describe, Rick, to this day, what May 27th, 1997 was like here in Austin. And to this day, I still remember dew points were in the upper 70s here in Austin, which is not usual. The humidity and the wind like it was. And I'll still remember that day at noon, several hours before the Gerald tornado that day. I just remember shaking my head saying, this is not good. And so it's interesting to hear those stories from people saying there was just something not right about this day.
Isn't the consistency just amazing?
Yeah.
And weather, for as inconsistent as it can be, there are tales like this of each tornado. What was the one in Missouri in 2011? Joplin.
Joplin. Yeah.
Boy, I have not read the book about that. I don't know if I could take it. But there were people who were telling me they were sensing that day that there was just something odd about it. And this happens all the way across, I think.
Yeah.
So people can tell. We're electronic beings, basically. We have circuits. We can tell.
So I have to wonder this, after the event, I'm not sure if your informants told you very much about what life was like afterwards, and especially how they attended to weather afterwards. So something striking that happens in the tornado fatalities database after 1925 is that the fatality rate starts to go down by share of US population. And I've talked about this quite a lot with Harold Brooks, and he wrote about this some with Chuck Doswell, speaking of Chuck, but we really don't know why that happened. And it's striking that it just happens to be around the time of this tornado outbreak, but it also is around the time that radios were being distributed more widely in homes. You start to get perhaps this combination of the advent of a technology that would allow people to start more widely broadcasting about weather at the same time as maybe public awareness would have really taken a sharp turn up. That this is something that people need to attend to. I'm not sure if that's anything that you heard about, if people talked about afterwards, if they started to get more like sort of weather forecasts, not even in what we would consider the traditional sense of what meteorologists are today, but just you hear about there being tornadoes one day in Kansas and you live in, Illinois, and you think, well, when things get bad in Kansas yesterday, today could be bad here in Illinois. Like you start to understand patterns, right?
Yeah.
And that what is upstream of you could come your way. I think we take for granted how quickly news travels today. And because of that, how much we're able to just transmit and prepare. But back then, that was novel. Did you hear anything about anything that could, relate to this from anybody that you talked to?
Well, I do have to say, they became the survivors that I spoke. They became very cognizant of weather after this. I don't recall anybody telling me that they listened to the radio for weather or that kind of thing. I don't think they did like a farm report or anything back then. I didn't really dig into that, even though I have a background in radio. I didn't really dig into that part of it. But I will say, these people who survived, the trauma was so intense that, again, they just point blank tell me, if a dark cloud came up, they began trembling. And some of them would just kind of walk around in a circle and shaking their heads and going, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? Well, when they were children, and if their parents had survived the storm, their parents would calm them, they would soothe them, they would tell them, we're going to be okay this time. If it happens again, we're going to be okay. The more adult people just kind of shut themselves off, like Cecil Spain, and they just kind of closed off. One of the things that I wrote about in the aftermath chapter, Maribel Melvin in Murfreesboro, she was 8 when the tornado came through. And then again in 1957, we had a tornado that came through Southern Illinois that was almost the exact path of the tri-state tornado. 1957. Well, by this time, Maribel had children, and adult children actually, and she looked out the window. Her daughter was there with her, and she looked out the window to the west, and here comes this big black cloud. And Maribel just kind of, I called it a fugue state, because really, she said, I was kind of in a trance. She said her daughter had to help her down to the basement, and the tornado passed over and they were fine, and her daughter brought her back up, and she just didn't remember getting down there to the basement or getting back up. It was that horrific for her. So some of these survivors really did, I think they were more attuned to the weather, but they all did it in their own different ways.
Angela, having spent a ton of time in newspapers, as Jen has, on events like this, you really see newspapers beginning to carry widespread coverage on front pages by the middle 19 teens. But it really starts to get, the wire services must have really been hitting their stride in the 20s. And then by the 30s, obviously, by the 1930s, you're getting really detailed reports all over the country from events that have happened all over the place. And Kim, I think that has something to do with it. You look at an event in the 1905-10 range, there might not even be a mention of it on the front page of the newspaper. You get into I guess World War I may have had something to do with it, but then by the 20s, it's widespread coverage. I was trying to see, what the front page of the Birmingham News looked like the day after, the 1925 tornado. And it's actually an ad for Loveman's, James. So that's not the entire front page of the paper is an ad for a department store, so, well, I guess we hadn't, it may happen after this, but the thing that, really struck me was, as a kid driving to the beach, my grandfather, would ride with us, and we'd ride through Chilton County and down through there, and he would always point out all the tornado shelters, the storm cellars. And he would say, that's a result of the 1932 tornado. And we've seen that a lot in Alabama. Like my grandparents and aunt didn't have they lived in Walker County, Alabama. Guin tornado was not very far away. They built the storm cellar after that. Unfortunately, my uncle built it pointing the wrong direction. I hope my Aunt Kathy's not watching tonight, because she loves to watch this show. And I never would get in that storm cellar because it was pointing the wrong direction. And I'm like, did you not even check with me before you built this thing? And so, but anyway, and it was full of spiders. So I'm taking my chances out here on the outside, hoping to see the tornado. But I think, you saw that in your book. You mention it about the proliferation of tornado shelters after this tornado. So talk about that.
I tried to stay as close to the path on the existing highways in 1999 as I could. And when we were going through, I guess we were coming out of Reynolds County and going up into where Annapolis is, we were seeing, I'm going to hold this up, my son, my gorgeous son, standing there in there's a storm shelter. It was just right there beside the road. There was a house on either side of it. And I guess they were doing a community storm shelter or something. We stopped and we asked the residents who were there. And they said, yeah, as far as they understood, after the tornado, a very enterprising group of people who they prefabbed these shelters, and then they'd go in and they'd concrete them in, I guess. they came through and said, we'd like to sell you one of these for $35 or whatever, which was a lot of money at the time. And people bought them. And so they were, the path is literally dotted with these storm shelters.
And James Spann, can I screen share for a second? Because I just told a big fib. So
go.
Disregard all former statements about the Birmingham News and Lovemans or anything to that effect, because this was the front page of the Birmingham News that after the tornado.
Oh.
I mean, that would get your attention.
Yeah.
That would get your attention. So, Kim, there may be your answer right there.
You know, yeah, this is the thing that's really interesting. Harold and I have long thought about how amazing it would be if there's an enterprising historian or history student or historian who's funding a history graduate student who needs a project. We think that it would be really interesting to do archival research to see what is the trend, if one can be discerned, about the way that weather was described in, you know, media, whether it be print or whatever radio records exist. We don't know what would, but it would be really neat to know if there is something we can see about growing public awareness. So even if you know, the wide area transmission idea through radio isn't exactly what happened. Maybe that did start to happen over time. If we at least get a shift, like a notable shift in public attention and, you know, the retail space and newspapers to talk about these things, then that could go some way toward telling us something, you know, sort of an indicator of why fatality rates start to go down. If you have awareness, then you'd start to have more of an idea of, oh, this is something we can know about, we can prepare for, we can respond to, you know, all the mechanics of what we take for granted today as a culture of tornado awareness and preparedness and responsiveness. None of that existed predating probably this event, at least not in the popular consciousness. There had been some big tornado events that had happened before 1925, especially if you're thinking about Missouri in St. Louis. St. Louis had been destroyed, you know, several times prior to this and then after this. And it's an interesting thing. When can one say that we started to develop a culture around tornadoes in this country? And I think it's something that archival analysis would be really neat to see. I took a course in pre-statehood history here in Oklahoma. And I was fascinated when I was doing archival research on, you know, our newspapers from before 1907. And I'd come across, even though it wasn't the point of my research, I'd come across the tornado mentions. And they were so incredibly small and dry, just like, oh, you know, Twister came from the sky last night, 13 people dead, and then like that was it. You know, it was like this tiny little thing, and under it is like, you know, someone advertising for, I've got land, I need a wife. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, what is this world? So I think that there is something that's discernibly different, and I do think that the 25 event has something to do with it. But again, could really use some help from professional historians to discern.
Well, sign me and Jen up. We're ready to go. We'll hit every historical society in America. But I was a child of the 1974 outbreak, which was another inflection point, like James Spann. I spent the entire night that night scouring the radio for information because television didn't do it, James. Nobody in Birmingham did it till you arrived in September of 79. It was a television wasteland. I remember Wendell Harris coming on finally about 8:30, you know, this placard on the screen that said, you know, WAPI TV 13 bulletin. And I'm like, okay, finally some coverage. You know, they said, you know, so many people had been killed in Northwest Alabama by tornadoes that night. But there just wasn't any great way back then. You know, no weather radio. You were dependent on a radio station that had a weather wire, and you were glued to them in the hope that they would read everything they could get their hands on, so you could try to get a handle.
And most stations didn't even have a weather wire.
Right.
They had the AP, the Associated Press,
and it was late.
And it would come in literally after the warnings expired. So you're right. Horrible.
I listened to WFMH in Coleman that night, James, and you know them very, very, very well. They were FM and very clearly able to be heard in Birmingham. But when the tornado hit Coleman that night, they went off the air and had to go to their transmitter and broadcast from there. And I remember, I'll never forget Ben Cleary and Wayne Wallace, Dixie Gospel Caravan, WDJC here in Birmingham. They had a weather wire, and between the Imperials and whoever, else they played on the gospel station that night, he would read those bulletins. And I was like the people in Angela's book. I thought the world was coming to an end. I fully didn't expect to come up the next morning. I was going to see Jesus and it was over with, but, thank goodness we have what we have today. I tell these children that are scared of weather now, I had a reason to be scared of it in 1972, 1973, because you were dependent on a DJ and whether they went off the air at sunset. And, now you've got all this incredible information at your fingertips. Just learn how to use it and empower yourself with it. So, anyway, sorry for the soliloquies tonight, but
No.
this is thank you for raising that point, Kim, because I think the mid 70s were a turning point. The Palm Sunday mid 60s were a turning point. Those were some inflection points in our dissemination of weather information.
Thank you, Bill, for your for your speeches. No, I love
Disregard 70% of what I said, but 30% I was gold.
No,
that's already the show title for tonight. Disregard everything I said. That's the show title.
I think that's perfect. James A., what do you got?
How long does that increased awareness last after a storm like this? Does it matter with the magnitude of the disaster?
I think it depended on the magnitude of the personal disaster, because as I was going through the research, I would just kind of drop, comments like at church. I would say something, and one of the little old ladies would come up to me and she would say, "Well, honey, I've got to tell you something. I used to live up in West Salem, and there was a whole family that moved up there from Griffin. And every single kid at the school, anytime it would thunder, every single kid would walk up in that family, would walk up to the teacher and say, 'Teacher, I have to go home. It's going to storm.'" And so she said, and I think her name was Mildred. She was probably 93 when she told me this. So those children, she said, and she knew them in West Salem for years and years and years, grew up, some moved away, some stayed. She said that stayed with them. She said they were, in the 1990s, anytime a dark storm would blow up, they would just pick up a blanket and whatever, if they had a pet or whatever, and they towed it down to the basement and they'd just sit there and wait. So it's specific to what happened to them. If it was just a big wind and it was a terrible experience, but their house remained and they didn't lose any loved ones, okay. But if it was someone like Lala Bridges in DeSoto, whose mother was bleeding out in front of her on the street as she held her in her arms, Lala she had a hard time getting through it. She got through it. She was an amazing storyteller and witness, but you could tell in her voice, you could tell in her expressions. And she had been, when the tornado picked her up, her and her baby sister, baby Ruby, she was holding baby Ruby in her arms. And the tornado picked her up and pulled her up above the treetops. She said she looked down and she could see the treetops waving back and forth underneath her. The tornado dropped her on the street and she landed on her, it was her right side. And the right side of her face was really banged up from that. So as she aged, her face just kind of fell on the right side. And it was very noticeable. And her nephew told me, he said, sometimes she just can't even look in the mirror because she sees this. And she knows why that happened. And she just can't do it.
That's so terrifying to me. I can't even imagine, being conscious through that process, being lofted and surviving it.
Yeah.
James has so many stories of people, that have been lofted and survived. Lots that didn't make it, but some that survived, like this lady, and I can't
Baby Ruby
imagine that.
survived also. Just to let you know, because when I went and did their big anniversary in DeSoto, I think in 2012, the first full year that the book was out, in the original format. Baby Ruby was in the front row when I went and did the presentation, and I had no idea she was living out of the area, but she came in and she was wearing my favorite color, purple, and she was just, all these people are so precious. I told my husband, I just wanted to pick them up and take them home with me. All of these dear elderly people. I just love them. Love elderly people. And now I'm getting there.
Yeah. Well, Bill, one thing that and Angela and all of us, and Jen and I've talked about this before, but my tornado back in Alcorn County in Corinth, Mississippi, back in 1970 on April 19th. I think I was in the 7th grade then, and I always remember it. But I was back in Corinth after our family left there and worked at the sheriff's office there for years, late 70s, late 70s. And that was in 1970. In the late 70s, Angela, in Corinth, Mississippi, this was an EF4, I think, or 3 or 4, and resulted in 4 or 5 deaths. It most strongly affected the Black community in Corinth. It was on the southwest side of the city. But I remember 10 years later working at the sheriff's office when a tornado watch was issued. We have a civil defense shelter in City Hall in Corinth. You couldn't get people in that. They came down there just with a tornado watch, and the police would let them into the civil defense shelter. And this was 10 to 15 years after the fact. They still remembered. And so I think it's real interesting. And Kim and I've had this discussion as well about what that memory time is like. I think that's really interesting. And does it wear off as people get older? And we assume it does. But to me, it was very clear, very, very clear after the fact.
Well, you're talking what, 60 years after the event? You talked to a lot of these folks, 60 to 70. What was it?
It was coming up on 75.
75 years after.
Yeah,
and
75 was 2000. And I was in the process of interviews when the 75th anniversary came around. And I was invited to DeSoto's memorial event. CNN was there. And it was just a big deal. And there were still survivors in DeSoto at the time, and they came to the event. But I could tell who they were. In DeSoto, they weren't jolly about it. There was no, this happened to us. Okay. They mourned. To this day. DeSoto shuts down on the 18th, and they mourn. In 2012, I called them and said, the people who were organizing the event, I said, I'm available on the 18th if you want me to come and do a presentation then. And they said, no, we don't do that. We shut the doors and close the blinds. So we did a presentation on the 24th instead of on the 18th. And then by contrast, this is what's so amusing. Griffin, they experienced a huge amount of devastation and a large loss of life and injuries and financial concerns. But Griffin, it's like they adopted the tornado. They named their school team the Griffin Tornadoes, and they put up all these markers, and there's hardly anything left in Griffin right now, but they call that their tornado. In Indiana, you go all over Knox County, Gibson County, Davis County, Posey County. Everybody says Griffin tornado. When I go there to do presentations, that's what I have to call it. Even though that was the 3rd state, and that's how I got tri-state tornado. They're the Griffin tornado.
I think Drumright, Oklahoma did the same thing after the 1974 killer tornado. I think they're the tornadoes. Somebody had written, Kim, you may know, I'm sure you do actually. There is a paper somebody did 15 years or so ago about the importance of community commemoration of disasters. Yeah, see, that's the same expression I had. I'm like, I know it's there. I don't have my Mendeley up on this computer. I'd look it up. I think it
don't
was
know.
an Australian.
Well, they now do. They really hadn't done a whole lot of commemoration of the tri-state tornado in newspapers in the area when, I mean, that was why I was so astonished by the whole thing. Where were the reports? Where were the anniversary? All the way up to 1981, I'd not heard of this thing, and yet it happened in my backyard. Then they started doing that much later. I think folks kind of caught on to the people were dying who had gone through, and I think they wanted to go ahead and make something relevant out of it. But commemoration of disasters, how do you feel about it? I mean, do you think that's something that needs to be done? Do you think it's something that, what do you think, Kim? Because I saw your face earlier.
It's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, you grew up right there not knowing that it happened. And I do wonder in the immediate aftermath what people did with that trauma. I mean, there are options. You can choose to really lean into it and come, like make it a part of your identity, or to bury it. And part of what you were talking about with the pick yourself up by the bootstraps mentality makes me wonder if it was part of their moving on, was to not dwell, just as a way to get past it. Sometimes things are so awful that it's hard to really face that. I think this is something, and we talk about commemoration and disaster. This is something that there have been societies that have gone through very, very horrible kinds of social traumas, socio-political traumas, and they make decisions about, commemorating or not, both as a function of just not wanting to, go through it again, prevention and learning, right? So like there's a thread of that goes through this too. You remember so that you don't, so you build back better, so to some degree, but there can also be commemorations that just keep bringing it back, that is a thing you don't want to face. And so a part of me questions, did people feel like there was a way to take it and learn from it? If not, bury it.
Well, I did talk to one of the gals that I talked to for the original paper interview, Anna Marie Bilberry. She was elderly, and so that meant she was a little older when the tornado happened, and she was hesitant when I first started talking to her about it. And I'm like, we're just commemorating this event, Anna Marie. It's okay, She goes, well, she says, I just don't like to talk about this thing. I've never liked to talk about it, but she says, I'm 97 years old, and maybe it's time to talk about it. And she had this almost like this bright expression on her face. And I said, well, if you feel like it, let's do it. And she did. And it just poured out. And so I thought, well, maybe that's kind of the therapeutic thing, the way for me to approach it, because I was relatively new in print media. I had been in radio since 1980. And so I was used to Mickey Mouse Man on the street stuff, that kind of thing. And I hadn't been in print very long. Sometimes people will bite your head off if you go to interview them about something that's not near and dear to their heart necessarily. I was a little hesitant because these people had survived something that killed their family, took their house, took their farm. I was a little hesitant. And over time, I developed a way that I could approach them. And I would say, I understand that it was a really terrible event, and I will understand if you don't want to talk to me about it, because many people don't. And they all come up with a variation of what Anna Marie said. Well, it's been all this time. I think I can.
I think there is a sense of healing for some who, after so many decades, after holding it in and they meet someone who cares, and you just wanted to know, about them and their story, and that they were able to share. I think they get to unburden that. And because deep down, I think everybody wants their family member to be remembered, to be honored. And I think there is a sense of healing. And I was just thinking about, for the 1974 50th anniversary, I went to Xenia's gathering for that. And it was like a big family reunion. It was very interesting to step in. I actually didn't feel like I belonged at all. And so I actually snuck away because I just watched everybody, though. I just stood back and watched, and everybody just came together and they were hugging each other, and it was like a big family reunion. And then Zach went down to the Guin anniversary memorial service at the First Baptist Church, and it was much more solemn. And he told me later on, he goes, Jen, I didn't even get my camera out. He goes, I just wanted to just be there and be with the folks. And they had the young people from high school read the names of the fatalities from the Guin tornado. And so I think, and I watched it on YouTube later, and I boohooed. It meant so much to me to watch that, because I think what Kim was said earlier about learning and education. I think that a lot of communities want their young people to remember. And Mayor Phil Seagrace from Guin said later, he goes, I had a lot of people come up to me, especially the young people, that said, now we understand. Now we get it, because they could see the damage photos, they heard the stories, they read the names, and it just, I think it brought together generations of what their family, their parents, their grandparents had been through, and now the kids understand. I just think that it's important to learn your history. And so, I wanted to ask you that, Angela, why do you feel that we should tell these stories? What obviously history means a lot to you, and these people that you've met that you just want to hug and take home with you. I've wanted to do that myself, and will continue to do so as I go visit people, and anyone that will talk to me, I will listen. Why should we tell these stories?
Well, like I was saying earlier too, history can get tweaked. And I was in newspaper long enough to know that an eyewitness account might not really be the account. You do have to get the peripheral stuff. You have to verify. But there's a process to verify, and that's fine. And it's almost like mechanical. You just go ahead and you do it, and you go to the local libraries and you find any research material that might have been there, and you verify. But the important thing was how this made these people feel. And that was what I wanted to capture. In 1999, well, 9/11 hadn't happened yet, see? And so many other major disasters hadn't happened yet. So every time something would happen, my husband and I would look at each other and would think, are they going to be resilient like your survivors of the tornado were? I don't know, but I think there needs to be more history books, real personal history about these events, weather events in particular, so people can learn from what folks said and what they did at the time. Even if this, like Lala Bridges, she was only 8 years old at the time, or whatever the age was of any person. How do they cope? How did they cope then? How are they coping 75 years hence? And what can I put in this book that will make the reader go, oh, if this ever happens to me, I would, or I wouldn't. Okay. And so it puts the reader there, and it actually makes people think and gives them some kind of plan, basically. Not just a survival plan, but how do you deal with that? I think that's very important in disasters.
Hey, Angela, let me ask you a question. I keep hearing the number 695 deaths, 695. Do we know that that's a good number? Accurate?
Well, when James, when we're talking about the 219-mile path, those were the deaths that occurred within that path, directly attributed, or out on the edges, maybe from debris, but right in that damaged path was the 695. I did some further research after the book was done, and long involved story about why it wasn't published in 2002. It was supposed to be, but it wasn't published until 2011. So I did some further research and found out that there was a huge storm system that the tri-state tornado was basically attending. It was doing the Gulf Stream thing, and then everything else around there were these pop-up storms, north and south. There were a lot of deaths in Arkansas, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee. I believe there might have been some in Mississippi too. Every year I have to read this book again to make sure I have all my facts straight. But there were a lot of deaths in the peripheral storms that happened along with the tri-state tornado. So you can say in that outbreak, easily close to 1,000 people died.
Wow. Yeah, I noticed Bill Murray in that newspaper you put up, it mentioned a Tennessee tornado that killed like 200. I mean, that whole thing was just horrific. So, but Angela, we've got to take a break. So for people that want to get the book, what's the best way to do that?
That is to contact me, because we don't have a website anymore. Either the Facebook page, Death Rides the Sky, the story of the 1925 tri-state tornado, or they can email me, angelajeanmason@gmail.com. But all of that information is on the Facebook page. That's the only social media I have. And then I have a PayPal, and they can PayPal me, and I'll ship them a book. Happy to do it.
How easy is that? And we'll put this information up on the website, weatherbrains.com, under the show notes for this week. But Angela, thanks for your time. This was a fascinating discussion. For those of us that have been doing this for a long time, that's just one for the ages, and you just want to learn more about it. And your book you've done so much work on that. It's a great way for us to learn, and we can learn from those past events like that to make us better in the future, even though this happened 100 years ago. So again, thank you. And when you worked at G100, which shift did you work? Again, I did radio when I was a kid. Did you work weekends or weeknights, weekdays? What were you working there?
It was weeknights, midnight to 6. And then it was Saturday, Saturday 6 to midnight, which didn't quite work out because I was doing theater at the time in Mobile. I worked with all the theater groups. So my shows were getting in the way. And ultimately, I just kind of dropped it all, But G100 was a really big station at the time, and WABB was our competition. And I always joke that myself and Marathon Mike, he was the one who did the midnight to 6 shift at ABB, and we were always on Arbitron ratings. We were back and forth, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2 spots, because we were always, and he'd call me, and he just razz me. He'd give me a hard time, and I'd call him and I'd razz him. This is not on air, but while we were in the studio, and I said, I'm going to get Arbitrons this month. Watch this, so.
You had a better name though, Angela. So yours beat his. His was pretty good, but yours beat his.
Journey on G100. Wow, that's
you just want to play hit the post contest with Angela, don't you? But we'll get so we'll get so knocked out by YouTube, it won't even be funny.
No, those were the glory days. Goodness gracious, the radio was so much fun back then. But we have to take a break. Angela, you're welcome to stay with us if you want to. We'll be here for about another 15 minutes. We have to do picks of the week, and we're going to talk about this situation in Oklahoma. So you're welcome to stay, but if you've got to run, we totally understand that. But again, thank you for your time tonight. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Let's take a break. Tony Rice is back this week. So we'll hear from Tony Rice in the Astronomy Report. We have This Week in Tornado History from Jen. We'll do an email segment. We'll discuss the Oklahoma storm chase situation and picks of the week, and maybe even more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your Astronomy Outlook.
Continuing this week through mid-February, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn are all visible in the evening sky. Look for Mars in the east with Jupiter in the southeast. Venus is very bright in the southwest, with dimmer Saturn directly below and separated by about 12 degrees. Early this week, the crescent moon is nestled about halfway between Venus and Jupiter. If you watch night over night, the moon will grow in illumination as it moves through its phases. By Thursday, it will be alongside Jupiter, separated by about 5.5 degrees. The moon will continue that eastward journey through the sky until Sunday, when the waxing gibbous, just a couple of days away from full moon, will be less than a degree from Mars. Every naked eye visible planet except Mercury, which is currently hiding behind the sun, is visible right now. Some have described this planetary parade as being a rare opportunity to see all 8 planets at once. I guess you can look at your feet and count Earth, but the most that you're going to see this week without a telescope is 4. Mercury will join the show later this month as it makes its way around from behind the sun, and it will be very close to Saturn on February 24th, but this is going to be happening very close to the horizon, so it'll be hidden from behind those trees and buildings for most of us. The ice giants Neptune and Uranus, they're up there too, down to the right of Venus and Jupiter, respectively, but at around 2 billion miles away, they're just too dim to see without a sizable telescope. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
This week in tornado history, the second largest February tornado outbreak since 1950 occurred during the evening of February 5th and the early morning of February 6th, 2008. The event began on Super Tuesday while 24 U.S. states held primary elections and caucuses to select the presidential candidates for the upcoming presidential election. 87 tornadoes occurred in 9 states, with 57 fatalities in 4 of those states. There were 5 violent EF4 tornadoes reported, 2 in Tennessee, 2 in Alabama, and 1 in Arkansas. The EF4 in Arkansas occurred on February the 6th, and it had a path length of 122 miles and crossed through 7 counties. This is the longest tornado path on record from 1950 to the current time in the state of Arkansas. A total of 13 people were killed along the path, and nearly 140 were injured. During the pre-dawn hours of February 6, 2008, the final of 5 violent tornadoes from the Super Tuesday outbreak would torment a pair of rural Jackson County, Alabama communities atop the Sand Mountain Plateau. During its 10.9-mile path, the vortex tore between the towns of Pisgah and Rosalie. There was 1 fatality along County Road 60. Linda Tinker was found 300 yards away from her demolished house.
Hey, time now to dig into the email inbox and just maybe there's something in there this week.
All right. We do have a few emails in here. I want to thank everybody for your guest suggestions. We're going to make sure Bill gets on top of that and gets the calendar more and more filled here through March and April. Thank you for those. And thank you to, let's see here, Catherine in Corner, who sent us a picture of, it looks like a frozen spider web due to freezing fog. That was pretty cool. I love it when people send us photos like that. But again, we have several guest suggestions that we've received here. A little bit of some conversation on kind of the follow-up of what happened with the Allen Media. We had some folks, did we talk about that? Going the other way on that? I don't think we followed up on that story, did we, James? With the Allen Media?
I don't think so.
Did we talk about that last week? Because there was a reversal on some of those decisions, and so I found that very interesting. That there were, from my understanding, a lot of folks hollered about it.
Yeah, there was a big fuss, and in response to that, they backed off. And quite frankly, I think it was advertisers pulling away because money talks, and I think that was scaring them a little bit, and they backed off on the releasing the local weather people. But they're still going to do a Weather Channel thing, and I don't think it was the entire company; it was just a few stations. So we'll see. But yeah, they relented to some degree.
Yeah, that was very interesting. So I wanted to read this email here because the title of it is, it's entitled Your Fault. And so I'm like, okay, what did we do now? This is from Rick Halterman wrote, I am behind on listening to WeatherBrains because of the holidays, and I'm just now catching up. The Brains had a discussion about no one ever really retiring from the weather enterprise. I think I'm an example of a syndrome that has yet to be identified. I retired from IT and began listening to WeatherBrains regularly. And since then, I have taken classes in meteorology from Penn State. I have no problem with that, obviously. Joined AMS, helped to organize AMS Jamposium, wrote an application to provide friends and family with localized watch warnings, advisories on their phones, given talks on weather awareness for the amateur radio operator. I think I may have retired to the weather enterprise. I blame the brains and plan to sue you guys before you spend all of your spare funds
Bring it.
on the 1000th episode. You guys have a seriously darn good podcast. Early congrats on the 1000th. That's hard to say. 1000 show. So thank you, Rick, for blaming us for you getting into weather and being a weenie like us. And thank you for everyone who writes us the emails with your suggestions and, blaming us for whatever. Email at weatherbrains.com. And maybe you could be the email of the week.
Yeah, we'll settle
So
for
let's
emails
go
like
to
that
our-
all day long.
You got it.
Let's go to our Oklahoma correspondents. Who wants to pick up on this regulating storm chasing stories? So Rick, Kim, James, somebody tell us, what's the story here? It's all over social media. It's getting the buzz. Let's go right to the officials that understand here. So who's going to pick this up?
I don't want to, but I'm going to go ahead and go first, and because I have no choice, I can't escape. But no, I have no idea where this came from. It's very oddly written. If you read the content of the bill, it's saying that if you're a certified TV station's quote storm tracker, or you're working with a university doing research, essentially you can pay $500 and get a license from the state of Oklahoma, and that gives you the authority to put flashing lights on your vehicle, run roadblocks. Essentially, you're an emergency vehicle at that point. Now, there's conflicting information out there. There's nothing that reads in the bill that this is outlawing storm chasers. This is not supposed to affect any other storm chaser out there. God only knows, OHP and the sheriff's offices, that's the last thing in the world they have time to do is to be stopping people checking their storm chasing licenses. There's been not similar, but bills to license storm chasing proposed in the past. There's always been a lot of discussion. I don't know. I just don't see this going anywhere. It's just so oddly written. I don't know who it came from. I don't know where it came from. And I know chasers are up in arms.
Yeah.
I've just seen on social media this evening, some storm chasers have actually met or have talked to the representative and the senator that proposed this, and they've met with them, and they're going to change the language. So I don't know. It's kind of a big deal, but it's a lot of excitement, and I just don't know if it's worth all the excitement.
Rick, I look at this thing and I've kind of read over it a little bit. And if you're with us last week, I'm the first person to speak out on behalf of law enforcement and understand the frustration you have when you have people violating traffic laws when this is happening. I understand that. But Rick, from what I could read, and James and everyone else online, I don't think there's a courthouse anywhere or a judge that wouldn't throw this damn thing out in a second, based on what I've read.
Yeah, it's
what triggered this? Was there a certain incident? What triggered it? Do we know?
I read an interview with him, and he said a storm chaser brought it up to him, but who knows who or what or.
It sounds to me the way it's written, and this may be a very cynical view, but it sounds like to me there's a storm chaser that really wants to just be able to be a cop or be a fireman and just put lights on their vehicle and run red lights and run through road. I may be overgeneralizing this. I realize that, and I apologize if I am, but that's what it reads to me. It's just written very, very poorly, I think.
So Kim, what say you?
I mean, I think you guys just about said it all. That is a really interesting proposal. I mean, the thing that gets me about it is I think that we have an actual need for something. I don't know how one regulates the space around a storm. That is like the profound challenge of it is so crazy. But we are in a place where if we're going to think about short-term forecasting, severe weather forecasting, where we're moving in the future is into the between watch and warning time scale. We're going to have a time scale where we could possibly try to foster the evacuation of populations out of mobile manufactured housing to get to someplace else. That if we have hordes, chase hordes descending in the same area where we're trying to maybe think about getting people out, like, I mean, not even just to speak of the current situation, which is the chase hordes themselves putting themselves in danger and each other in danger and public safety officials, they're in their way, all of that. But if they are blocking, people who are trying to seek safety, um, I think we have some real challenges with the way that things have gone. And I'm not going to lie, I really used to enjoy chasing, and I just it's a much scarier thing now than it was when I started. It's kind of nuts, and I'm sad if this was some chaser who was trying to just carve out, like, okay, I have the ability to, because I have a license to carve out my own space for my truck. No one can be around me. I'm going to block a road. I'm going to have the lights. And, I'm the king storm chaser here because I've got a license. That's a sad motivation if that's what it is, for this kind of thing. If there is a motivation to try to make things safer and to try to regulate the space in some way, shape, or form so that there are fewer people out there, I think we could use some innovation. This isn't going to get us there, but some good ideas are probably sorely needed.
Yes. And I think that pretty much says it all. And hopefully we'll get more answers to these questions in coming weeks. But interesting development, we'll put it that way. Hey, Bill Murray, look who joined us. You wanna bring
Yeah,
him in?
James, it's that time of year again. We're joined by the World Universal spokesperson for Midland, USA, our friend Bruce Jones, coming to us live from Kansas City. Bruce, will you be at the National Storm Chasing Summit now that we're talking about storm chasing here and talking about legislating and all that? Are you going to be over in the park next weekend when that really cool event kicks off? I understand it sold out in like 4 seconds this year.
Did it really? Yeah. Yeah, we'll have a big presence there. And actually, I know the storm chasers, they probably already own weather radios. So I told our people, I said, well, bring the two-way radios, the 50-watt GMRS radios, because I think that's what really the chasers would be more interested in, is the 50-watt GMRS General Mobile Radio Service. It's kind of like I guess it'd be like CB radio 2.0 or something. The signals go a lot farther than a CB radio signal, and they're a lot clearer. So for the Jeep Jamborees and a lot of people who are out in the boonies, these GMRS radios they're the bomb now. That's what you want when you go chasing. So I think at our booth at the Storm Chaser conference, we're gonna be featuring a lot of the two-way radios actually.
Are they all on the same frequency, Bruce, or can you have different frequencies? Is it a settable thing on the unit itself?
Yeah, there's I don't know, maybe a dozen or 16 different channels that you can use. And so, you could go out with a bunch of your buddies in different cars and be set on the same channel and so forth. But the GMRS, a 50-watt GMRS mountaintop to mountaintop, I mean, that'll go almost 70 miles. The signal will.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Back in the old days, James, we had our Sears Wish book, and I was glad to get those little radios to go around the corner. I'd have been loving one of these things. I tell you what, do they require a license, Bruce?
Yeah, GMRS is a license. It's not a test. You just send the FCC $35 and you have a license for 10 years for you and anyone in your family, actually. So as long as you are the one who hands the radio to your son or daughter, they can broadcast on those GMRS frequencies as well. But yeah, it's kind of the new thing. And we see a lot of the CERT teams, the community emergency response teams, using these frequencies now because, again, the signal goes a long ways and they're relatively inexpensive. The little walkie-talkies are.
Well, wait a week because Bruce has not had time to set up our special promo code yet for this year. So we'll do that next week. So you know, if it, I don't want to discourage you from getting a weather radio though, Bruce. I guess you know we're not in a really busy period right now, but we're going to be shortly, and we got to start thinking about if we've got friends, family members, or if we don't have one in our house. I know mine has a prominent place on the chest of drawers in my bedroom and another one down here in my office. So, you know, but everybody's got to have these. You know, this is the first line of defense.
Yeah, and I've been kind of preaching this since about 1976, believe it or not. I'm just a big believer in radio. I'm like Angela and James and you, Bill. I just believe in the radio frequency as an outstanding way and inexpensive way to communicate with people. And it's very robust, you know. It takes a lot to take radio down. So when we have these big disasters like a Hurricane Katrina or something like that, the wildfires in California, radio to the rescue. It really is.
Yeah, after Hurricane Helene in North Carolina, the radio stations came to the rescue. It's happened so many times in our history here in Birmingham. James was part of that for the blizzard in '93, right, James?
Yeah, goodness. I mean, people one day will really appreciate RF and radio and all of this when their phone doesn't work and the internet doesn't work, and all of a sudden you start to panic a little bit. But good old RF technology, Bruce, you can't beat it.
I agree. I agree. And I hate to sound like I'm, beating the same drum, but I just honestly, like I said, hey, there's the Voyager 1 spacecraft that's 15 billion miles from Earth. And when they want to communicate with it, they send a radio signal up there and it sends a radio signal back from 15 billion miles away.
Insane.
Hey, Bruce, any thoughts on the spring tornado season? Just your thoughts, the way it's setting up? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. We've seen some pretty powerful low pressure systems kind of rotating through. And we had an 11-inch snow here in Kansas City about 2 weeks ago. And then we had some pretty good rain here recently. So we've got some soil moisture in the Midwest. And to me, that's one of the things you need to have if you're going to have a rollicking tornado season. You've got to have that soil moisture in place. And it is right now. The lawns are pretty soggy up here in Kansas City.
Send some of that our way, Bruce. Send it to Austin. That's 78759. Yeah.
Well, we are delighted. We're delighted to have you back, Bruce. In fact, get ready for picks of the week here. In fact, let's morph right into that, and that we've been kind of running long here. So this is where everybody goes around the horn and shares something that's weather related. So Angela, if you're still there, if you've got a cool, you can make your Facebook page your pick of the week. But if you want something else, this is your chance. So we'll come to you in a second. My pick, the Weather Service in Mobile, did kind of a summary of the historic Gulf Coast winter storm a couple of weeks ago, and they've got their final summary up on their website. So that'll be my pick of the week, the great Blizzard Beach winter storm of 2025. All right, Troy Kimmel, give us a pick. Go.
I've got kind of an interesting one. I think this is a more James and Tulsa and Troy here, and Rick may be interested in this, but another Daryl Hertzman production. After the winter storm down here, talking to people with the FAA here in Austin and with airport operations, they've always been real interested in a one check place to be able to see METAR data for an airport, in addition to the TAF or the terminal, the area forecast for the airport. But in addition, I was sending it one time, the scraped out part of the aviation forecast of the AFD. So I got on the phone and called Daryl, and I said, Daryl, how about if there's a way, and actually the Aviation Weather Center, Jennifer, the people up there have one of these pages, but it doesn't have the AFD in there. What Daryl has created is a page that if you just want to change it in the web address, you can put in the airport code in addition to the state of the ASOS or AWOS or whatever. And you can see the observations, you see the TAF, and you see the scraped out aviation current forecasts. And let me tell you, when you bring up this page, James, in Tulsa, it is auto updated. You can leave it up, and when the AFD comes in, it'll scrape it, put that aviation section in there, and it's real nice for all the folks out there that may have an aviation interest for a particular airport.
Very
A
nice.
link for
But
that
let's go to
in
James.
the
Let's go-
chat, Troy. That sounds fascinating.
No, it really is cool stuff. And I'll tell you, the talking to people, the FAA here in Austin and things like this, just to be able to read what the National Weather Service Austin San Antonio has put out in the aviation, and then see the TAF, the terminal area forecast, in addition to what's going on now, the METARs. They say this discussion is invaluable to them now to understand what's going on.
In the chat.
So let's go to
in the chat. In the chat.
Yep.
Bill, you okay?
Yeah, I'm just having fun over here tonight, James. It's
Okay.
great
Are we
when
supposed to
Jen's
disregard that
Jen
too?
gets to be the host. I
Yeah,
get to just act over here and act
disregard
out.
everything I said. Let's go to James Adelot because he's got to do Fox 23 News at 9 o'clock. So, James, your time is almost up. So give us a good pick.
Yes, and it will be a riveting 9 o'clock newscast, I promise you, as all of them are. Mine is on the National Weather Service. Paducah has a set of pages on the tri-state tornado, and they have superlative statistics for it, which are just absolutely mind-blowing. But that link is my pick of the week.
And all of these picks will be up on the website, weatherbrains.com. Kim, give us a good pick of the week. You're up next.
I don't have one. I get the foghorn. I have
Hey. I like that a lot. Ooh, yes. The tones are so melodious. We love it. All right. Rick Smith got a pick for us this week.
Yeah, it's coming up on that time of year, February 5th. It's like Christmas for meteorologists. That's National Weather Person's Day. And my pick of the week is a link to one of the Weather Service offices that did an explanation of it. It's the day of the year when all the Weather Service meteorologists look at all the TV meteorologists' Facebook pages and are jealous that they got full-size quarts of ice cream and we got nothing. So that's my pick.
By the way,
in fact,
National Weather
Yes.
Person's Day is also, I'm not kidding, National Shower with a Friend Day.
Okay, thank you very much, James. We appreciate it.
Wow.
Just
how did we
saying,
lose control
He
here?
knows. He knows. Span, you started this show asking what we were all wearing. So I think James just brought it full circle.
I'm talking
Yeah,
about
no,
ice cream and then what? Yeah.
I will
goodness.
I will say the Bluebell people came by today.
Yep.
Now, not Wednesday, but they came by today and delivered the ice cream. Every year, we get Bluebell ice cream. So Bluebell, thank you. Please remember our friends at the National Weather Service. Please. If nothing else, Rick Smith, just please take him some ice cream. All right. Jen, give us a pick of the week.
Mine is the paper from Robert Johns and Burgess and Chuck Doswell on the 1925 damage path reanalysis. It's so good. And so that's my pick of the week.
And Bruce Jones, welcome back. Got a pick for us this week?
Indeed, I do. I've been following the wildfires out in California. I don't know if anybody has ever seen this app called Watch Duty. Watch Duty. Oh, this is fantastic. It's free, and it's mostly for the western states. They haven't expanded it eastward, but it's for the western states. But kind of gives you all the update on the wildfires, the evacuation zones, etc. If you pay a little money, then you can also get all the helicopters and the air tankers flying through. It's pretty amazing, and did a wonderful job covering the LA fires, sending out all the evacuation notices, et cetera, et cetera. It's just some guy out on the West Coast, a retired firefighter guy, who decided to kind of cobble all these information sources together. It's called Watch Duty, and I was very impressed with it.
Amazing. Yes.
Sounds very useful. Very useful. So, Angela, we have stalled long enough. Maybe you got something you want to share as a pick of the week. If not, just review your Facebook page again. All up to you. So go.
Well, we'll do the Facebook page, which is just simply called Death Rides the Sky, the story of the 1925 tri-state tornado. And I cover on the Facebook page weather events, everything that's of interest, the fires, Hurricane Helene, Maui, when that happened, just everything you can imagine. And that is also how you can get in touch with me. Direct mail me there, direct email. And if you need a book, that's where you can go to get the book.
Outstanding. So everybody go like that page immediately and follow that page. Bill Murray, what you got for us this week?
Yeah, James fan, just there's so much good news today that I thought I would share some more good news, and that's that there's an asteroid that has a 1 in 71 chance of hitting the Earth in 2032. So all this may be for naught,
Hey.
and we won't know till 2028. So Tony Rice needs to get on this. So we're at some DEFCON 3 for some called the Torino scale, and I don't know what that means, but I hope it means somebody's doing something about it. But 1 in 71, 100-foot to 300-foot asteroid, James, and I hear that's a Tunguska type size event. So let's keep that on out of here. I don't need that.
What year? What year is this?
2032.
What year is this going to hit? 2032. Okay.
Set your
At
watch.
my age, I might not be alive.
I was going to say.
Is this a Bill? Is this something else we can disregard? That you're
Yeah, I'm
saying?
hoping.
I really
Yeah.
we've disregarded everything else you've said tonight.
No,
so I'm just curious.
My pick of the week is a Scientific American article on it. So, but I hope we'll get to disregard it for sure. But really excited about the next 3 weeks. Karen Kasib is joining us next week. It was an offshoot of last week's great show. And the great Janice Huff is supposed to join us on the 17th if her handlers will approve it in New York City. Thumbs down to the Fox Weather people who turned down an appearance by one of their folks. So thumbs down to y'all. I don't watch you anymore on my little TV up here. Sorry about that. You're boycotted till you come back, Fox Weather, and let somebody be on our show. But Roger Edwards.
For all the hate mail, that's bill at billmurray.com. All you, yes.
Bring it. I may regret that. But anyway, Roger Edwards will join us on the 24th, and he is now unrestrained. So it's going to be a fun show. Yeah. Roger Edwards unrestrained. And then there's this break in the shows, James, between the 10th and the 24th. There's no show on the 17th. I don't know why that is. So maybe, I don't know. We're coming back on the 24th. There's no show on the 17th of March. So I don't know what that's about.
That would be show 1000.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that one. Okay, yeah. Some news hopefully be coming in the next week about that.
Yay.
News soon. All right. Well, if you're new here, we are typically on the air Monday nights, 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 o'clock Central. You can watch this live on the WeatherBrains YouTube channel, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. We know that most of you listen to the produced audio podcast. If you want to get in touch with us, send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. The email address, it is email@weatherbrains.com. On behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week, and God bless.
There's a fog outbreak.
Angela, thanks.
On the
This
Gulf
was
Coast.
great.
Angela, that was awesome. Thank you. So
Thank
nice
you so
to see you.
Yeah, that was
very
good.
good.
Good job leading our
thrilled.
discussion too, Jen.
I am so thrilled that I was asked to be. I mean, I emailed Jen because my tech guy is like, you need to find some podcasts to get on to promote the book. And I'm like, okay. So very first one.
The best one was right here, baby. That's right.
That big one.
And just stop.